Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our second Leadership in Practice webinar. Last week, we explored how leaders engage communities and identify stakeholders. Today, we'll build on that foundation by focusing on active listening and communication, one of the most important skills for building trust, strengthening relationships, and leading effectively. We're very pleased to welcome back Elise Verdoner, whose experience supporting community-centered programs around the world brings both practical and global perspective to today's discussion. As always, we encourage you to introduce yourself in the chat. If you're joining us for the first time, you can also just let us know that you're here from last week. Let us know where you're coming from, your country, and what you do. What's your job title? You can type that in the chat. Please participate in the discussion. This webinar is for you. And ask questions throughout the webinar. We'll either stop during and answer the question, or we will hold the questions for the end. We'll also answer as many during the session, and if there's any follow-up, we will send it in the email. So Elise, thank you for being with us again, and I'll hand it over to you now.
Great, thank you. And I just submitted, oh, perfect, to share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see my screen. Okay, awesome. Thank you all for being here, joining us for this second session. It's great to see where you are all joining us from and to seeing your introductions in the chat. So please keep them coming and thank you. So as Govinda shared, today we're focusing on active listening and communication. Last session, we talked about who you're engaging, how to engage them. And today we'll focus on how to actually show up in those conversations. So my goal for you all is to leave today with concrete tools that you can use and apply in your daily conversations. So what to expect? We will start by discussing what is active listening? What does it look like in practice? From there, we will build out your communication toolbox. This will include reflecting, clarifying, open versus closed questions, and then we will close the session with the discussion of communication across cultural differences. So to get us started, and as you're introducing yourself in the chat as well, I want you to think of a time you felt truly heard and what made it feel that way. Please either type into the chat or come on mic. As a reminder, this was your homework from last week. This was to get us all thinking about the ways that we communicate, the ways that we show up. And if you weren't here last week, that's very okay. Please still participate. Reflect on this question and share your thoughts in the chat. Okay, so we see good eye contact, repeating to see if they correctly understand, and blocking out distractions. Yeah, those are great. We'll talk more in detail about those, absolutely. What else? In what situations do you feel heard? This can be in your personal life, and this can also be in your professional or with your friends, with your family. What does it mean to feel truly heard? Okay, feeling calm and peace. Thank you. And I'll wait for one more reflection to come into the chat. Yeah, non-judgmental. Yeah, and no interruptions. Awesome. So I encourage you to keep thinking about this. Feel free to keep writing your examples into the chat and sharing. Um, yeah, attentive presence, feeling understood. Thank you. Yeah, please keep writing in and hold on to this. Hold on to this feeling because everything that we cover today is going to connect back to this feeling of what it means to feel truly heard and how we can do that for other people and create that space. Yeah. So, to start us off, what is active listening? So, we often use the words hearing and listening interchangeably, as if they mean the same thing. But there is an important distinction here that I think is worth naming. So hearing is passive, it's automatic. What the other person says is going to enter your ear. Your brain will register it. It might file it away. Whereas listening is active. It's intentional. You're making a deliberate decision to be fully present in the conversation. Yeah, to acknowledge what the other person is saying. Yeah, listening without interruption. I love what's still coming into the chat. So, yeah, you're listening for what is said, how it's said. You're tracking the meaning underneath, what's underneath the words, and also what is not being said, what's not kind of explicitly out there. In the work you all are doing, this distinction is really important and it has real stakes for your work. So, for example, you might hear somebody say, "Yeah, I've been taking the medication," while simultaneously you're thinking about your next question, maybe something in their file, or maybe you're feeling pressure to get through this visit because you have a lot more people that you have to go and talk to. So you heard the words, but if you were actively listening, you might have noticed maybe a hesitation, or maybe the person looked away nervously. So we'll spend a lot of time talking about how to make this shift from hearing to listening. But most importantly, um, active listening is a learned skill. A lot of us, or most of us, were never explicitly taught how to listen. We are socialized through families, teachers, peers, our surrounding environment. We are forming these communication patterns, and some are good, some are maybe not as good, but they're patterns for how we interact with others. And the good news is that because active listening is a skill, we can practice it and we can strengthen it. So then, before we start practicing those skills and strengthening those skills, let's look at what active listening looks like in practice. It's worth asking, why does it matter? Why not just ask your questions, gather the information, and then move to your next visit, to your next appointment? Well, active listening, pausing and taking the time, it builds rapport. And that rapport makes your work possible. It deepens and sustains your connections with the communities that you serve. And when people feel truly heard, they trust you more. They're more likely to be honest about what they're experiencing and to tell you what's actually going on rather than what they think you want to hear. Active listening is also important for practical reasons. So, when you listen, you're going to understand the full picture, not just the presenting problem, but really the context behind it. And you're catching what isn't being said as well. You're able to resolve misunderstandings before they come conflicts or barriers. And but if they do escalate to conflicts, we'll talk about how to address those difficult conversations in our next session. But ultimately, active listening allows you to our interventions are going to be more relevant and more effective because they are informed by the real world context. So maybe we'll take a moment and think back to last week. We had an example of a vaccination campaign, And again, if you weren't here last week, that's okay. But we had a vaccination campaign example that fed us through the session that we referenced back. And as a reminder, we talked about two different personas, two possible people and community members that you might engage in your campaign, Fatu and Joseph. So active listening is going to create the conditions where those two individuals, Joseph and Fatu, can share their concerns about the program rather than simply saying, yes, they'll participate, but maybe they have no intention of actually getting involved. But if you're able to build trust and foster that relationship, they might not only be engaged, but share insights that can be used to improve your work as a whole. And so we'll discuss a lot more as examples in the coming slides. So then what does active listening actually involve? What are we tracking? So two categories that I want to talk about, verbal cues and nonverbal cues. So verbal cues include the words that somebody is choosing and the ones they avoid. We are tracking their tone of voice. Is it flat? Is it hesitant? Emotional? Is it confident? We're looking at their pace. Are they speaking quickly? Are they trailing off, not finishing sentences? Are they pausing? Where are they pausing? We're noticing what they repeat or what they come back to, because that repetition usually signals that something is important. And we're paying attention to perhaps what they don't say, the gaps, the deflections, the topic changes. Then on the nonverbal side, we're looking for a facial expression. Does it match what is being said? We might look at eye contact, like somebody mentioned in the chat. Are they keeping that eye contact? Are they avoiding it? Are they shifting where they're looking? And what does their body posture look like? Are they opened up? Are they closed? Or are they turned away? All right. Do they have their hands on their hips? Do they seem rigid? What does their body tell us about the words that they're saying and the meaning underneath? And how, or are they, and how are they using gestures? And then when are we noticing the moments of silence, right? Is that comfortable? Is it uneasy? Is it resigned? So now I want to try something. Imagine I am a community member and you've just asked me a question. I will respond 2 times with the same words, but I want you to watch carefully and notice what is different. So you ask me, how have things been going with your clinic visit? The first example. Honestly, I'm not sure I understand why I need to come. The journey takes a while. I have a lot going on at home. I've been managing okay on my own, but I just wonder, are all these visits really necessary? So that's our first example. Now, what about this? Again, the same words. Honestly, I'm not sure I understand why I need to come so often. The journey takes a while, and I have a lot going on at home. I've been managing okay on my own, but I wonder if all these visits are really necessary. So I use the exact same words both times, but different body language and nonverbal cues. What did you notice? What was different? Please share some observations in the chat or feel free to come on mic as well. And for those that maybe are listening just on audio, maybe you heard something with nonverbal cues as well, or I guess that is verbal, but maybe you heard something with pacing, not just the words that I was using, but how did my tone of voice differ? How was the pacing differ? So yeah, so different body language, different tone. The first was looking away, hands up, blocking, a doubtful tone. Mhm. The first example, the response was not encouraging. The second example, there's energy in the expression. Yeah, thank you. Facial expression. So the first, reluctant, not interested. Mhm. Yeah, the first seems to be trouble. Yeah, and an interesting point around reluctant or not interested, and um, yeah, or and the way I'm going back to our conversation from last week, the way that we approach this person um, in how we work with them is going to be influenced by how we perceive them, right? We'll talk more about this later as well. Um, but yeah, really great observations. Yeah, it looked tired in the first one. The tone was flat, the pace was slow. Awesome. Yeah, you're all of these absolutely right. Yeah, thank you for the participation. So yeah, my arms were up. Maybe I was covering my face. I was looking away. Yeah, I may have sounded more hesitant, uncertain, or even perhaps scared, right? There might be something else going on under the surface worth exploring, right? The question that was posed in both times to this response was, how have things been going with your clinic visits? But in the words, right, there's a lot going on at home. So there are opportunities to go deeper and check what is happening under the surface. And all of these, uh, yeah, really yeah, good observations, and starting to um, unpack what we are seeing, and we'll talk. We'll get there in a few moments about trying to make meaning of these cues that we're picking up, right? And how we jump from uh, looking away that maybe sometimes it means I couldn't care, or that I'm not interested, and it might also mean that um, I'm in a hurry, or I'm afraid, or I don't I need more access to services. I need more support, right? Yeah, and a lot of you mentioned my that second example. It is more open. It is more confident, um, uh, and perhaps said the same thing with confidence. You know, I have a lot going on at home, but I'm saying it with confidence in a way that perhaps I'm managing okay. So you might not need to follow up with additional services. So both of these, the same words said very differently, will influence the way that our interaction will move forward. So, all of these things that you are identifying, these are the exact cues that are going to separate hearing from listening, right? You're picking up on things that most people aren't consciously noticing, or maybe they notice, but they're not calling awareness to what they're seeing and how it's impacting our interaction, right? So, noticing these things is a great first step in active listening. So, before we continue building out our skill set with active listening, I want to take a moment to pause and talk about some of the barriers that do come up. And even when we care deeply about the people that we are working with, and we are coming to the interactions with good intentions, sometimes there are inevitably things that get in the way of our ability to fully listen. So, spending some time talking about those barriers is worthwhile. And most of us will probably recognize ourselves in at least one of these situations. As a trained social worker, I still find myself in many of these situations. And the goal here is just to notice what is going on and how it is impacting our conversations, with the eventually trying to mitigate the barriers when possible. So, the first, distraction. Your attention is divided. Part of you is present, but perhaps another part is thinking about something else. So, for example, a community member is telling you about a problem at home, but you're already thinking about your next visit. rushing to solutions. So before the person has finished speaking, maybe you're already planning what advice to give, what to say next. This is a really common pattern with health work because often we're trained to find solutions, especially to medical challenges. And that instinct can sometimes get in the way of what somebody is trying to tell us and take away from the whole picture. Next, making assumptions. This is when you fill in the gaps with what you expect rather than what is actually being said. So, for example, someone mentions he hasn't been taking his medication, and you assume it is carelessness, not that he cannot afford it. Or perhaps there are side effects that he hasn't told you about. The assumptions are going to close down the conversation before it has a chance to open. And then hierarchy and power. The power dynamic between you is going to shape what you feel comfortable saying and asking, but also what they feel comfortable sharing with you. So, for example, a community elder is speaking, and you don't want to ask him to slow down or repeat himself. Or maybe a community member feels they cannot correct you, so they just nod along when they don't actually understand something. An emotional reaction is when something in the conversation is triggering something personal for you, and that distracts you from the present moment. We'll talk a lot more about what to do in these situations in our next session, focused on navigating difficult conversations. But for now, try to notice when you're having a strong emotional reaction, how it impacts your ability to listen. Are you getting distracted and thinking about something else? Are you getting defensive? Are you starting to judge the person? Just notice what's happening for you. And then finally, time pressure and fatigue. And this one is very real, and it is one of the hardest barriers to address because it's really not about intention. It's truly just about capacity. And your ability to actively listen is impacted by the demands of your work. And so, structurally, sometimes this is just hard to navigate. But as I said, recognizing these barriers is really the first step. And then the second is having tools to work through them. So that's where we'll spend the majority of our time from here on out focused on. So we've talked about what active listening is, what gets in the way of it. Now I want to give you some concrete and practical skills that you can use and practice and strengthen after you leave today. So to do this, I use this concept of a communication toolbox. So we are going to add 5 different tools to that toolbox, organized in 3 categories. The first, reflecting. This is when showing someone that you are engaged in the conversation. And we will talk about mirroring and emotional reflection. The second, clarifying. This is making sure you are understanding the other person correctly. It includes paraphrasing and summarizing, as well as checking for understanding. And the third is inquiry. This is guiding the conversation and asking questions in a way that allows you to go deeper with what the other person is saying. And we will look at open versus closed questions. But let's start with the first category, reflecting. So the first within reflecting is mirroring. And this means repeating back key words or phrases, or sometimes body language, to show you are attentive to what the person is saying. So, for example, a community member says, I've just been so tired lately, too tired to even cook for my children. A mirroring response might pick up the phrase, too tired to even cook, or maybe cook for my children. So you're stating it again without adding anything, and then wait. And that pause matters. Mirroring invites the person to keep going. It signals you heard what they said and please continue. But be intentional with what words you choose and the direction that it takes the conversation. Mirroring too tired to even cook is going to take the conversation in a different direction than saying, cook for your children. One might prompt the individual to talk about the responsibilities at home and the other about their children. So there isn't one right answer for how to mirror what to mirror, but just to be mindful of the ways that you are steering the conversation with what you say. So another thing to keep in mind is to avoid parroting. So mirroring should feel like a natural response, not a mechanical repetition. So in this example, if you respond back with, yeah, you've just been so tired lately, too tired to even cook for your children, it might come across as, yeah, I just said that. It might be feel judgmental, maybe, or distract from the conversation, um, which then relates to less is more. Pick one phrase, not everything that was said, and then pay attention to tone. The same words that are said with the wrong tone can feel mocking or dismissive rather than affirming. So, too tired to even cook sounds very different than, too tired to even cook. Thinking back to our discussion of verbal and nonverbal cues, you'll notice that first time I have a raised eyebrow, a slight scoff, versus the second, I offer a gentle nod. I soften my eyes. So let me say them again to see if you can pick up on the difference and what that feels like. Too tired to even cook versus, too tired to even cook. Right? Very same words, very different meaning, and perhaps hopefully you felt the difference if you were on the receiving end of those statements. So then beyond repeating back part of what was said, on the right-hand side, you'll see some phrases that you can use as a lead-in to a mirroring statement. So you mentioned X, Y, and Z. You said X, Y, and Z. So you've been X, Y, Z, and so you're saying X, Y, Z. So yeah, the first one feels judgmental, and the second one feels like a shared concern. Yeah, judgmental and mirrored. Awesome. Thank you for writing those observations in the chat. I'm glad you could pick up on the difference there. So yeah, it's about not only mirroring the words that are used, but also going back to the nonverbal cues and the tone and facial expression, and it goes both ways, right? That it's both what we're hearing, but then how we are mirroring it back and what we are saying and how we are physically showing up in those conversations.
Let's pause for a second and take it in. Everything that's been said, lots of very good information. Could you go back 2 slides so they can see? Just want to go back to making sure that we see. So, oh, just sorry, oh, just one slide. Um, so the communication toolbox, mirroring again is part of reflecting, right? So we're reflecting, showing someone that you are engaged in the conversation. And maybe we can pause just for a minute or two after each one of the reflecting, clarifying, and inquiry. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. Third, mirrored judgmental response. First judgmental. Okay. We can continue. And also just it's a good pace, but just a little slower so that the interpreter can catch her breath. Thank you.
Yes, sure. Thank you for letting me know.
Elise, I'm gonna go right ahead and just interrupt you one more time. Miriam, if you can tell our Francophones listeners, I will be putting the presentation in French, the link to the presentation in French in the chat in just about 1 minute so that they can also access it and follow along if they're able to, depending on what device they're using. Thank you.
Thank you both. And yeah, please ask questions, ask me to slow down anybody in the chat as well. Thank you. There's a lot here and it's dense material and a lot for you to think about. So please pause me at any point. Thank you. Okay. So the second tool in our reflecting toolbox, or part of reflecting, will be looking at emotional reflection. So when mirroring stays close to the words, emotional reflection will go one layer deeper and look at the feeling underneath what is being said. Emotional reflection is naming and acknowledging what that emotion is that you are observing. So the person is feeling not just heard, but understood. The example on the slide says, I've been trying to follow the diet, but it's just so hard with everything going on at home. So a mirroring response might be, everything going on at home. And then so yeah, everything going on right home might be a mirroring response. So I'm looking at the question in the chat about saying more on reflecting and mirroring. So reflecting is a category, it's a bucket of tools. So it is reflecting back what is being said, both the words and the. So mirroring is going to stay closer to those words, what is being said, whereas emotional reflection is turning the emotion back, reflecting the emotion back into what is being said. So both mirroring and emotional reflection are forms of reflecting. Hopefully that clarifies. So yeah, mirroring everything going on at home invites the person to elaborate on what is really going on. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that example. But so maybe then we are further in the conversation. Right? The slide doesn't tell us the full story of the full picture, but maybe they've already shared quite a bit about some of their challenges. So an emotional reflection might be, it sounds like you're feeling overwhelmed, right? So in this example, you are naming what you heard underneath the words, right? So going beyond mirroring to then labeling it with an emotion. And this isn't what you're assuming, but it's giving voice to the experience and allowing the other person to resonate with that. So a question in the chat, can mirroring be misunderstood by the speaker if not done rightly? Yeah, it's mirroring, not that it's misunderstood, but it will guide where the conversation goes. So in that example before, or let's take this example. I've been trying to follow the diet, but it's just so hard with everything going on at home. So if you mirror back following the diet, that's going to prompt the person to talk more about the diet. But if you mirror back everything going on at home, that's going to prompt the person to talk about what's going on at home. And so there's no right or wrong way to mirror. Just know that what you mirror will guide and influence the conversation. I hope that helps answer that question. Whereas emotional reflection, you might get this wrong, actually. You might misunderstand, and that's okay. Sometimes we are afraid of layering and labeling emotions, and giving kind of an assigning an emotion on what is being said. Um, but oftentimes, it's okay if you're wrong. The person will say, no, I'm actually not overwhelmed. I just need more information about the diet, for example, right? So they'll often correct you and the conversation will continue. Um, and so if you mm, build rapport, if you're showing that you care, if you are practicing these other active listening skills, you will be close to being able to label the emotion. But if not, it shows that you're invested in the conversation. You will give voice. They will try it on, say, overwhelmed. Not really. Let's talk about this instead, right? And so it shows that you're still invested in the conversation, and the conversation will um, move on. If there are any questions that come in French in the chat and you want to ask them also, feel free to interrupt me.
I wanted to just interrupt really quick and maybe you and I can just show that. So if
Yeah,
you were to ask me a question, or I can ask you a question, uh, have have you how are you feeling after the birth of your baby?
yeah,
And I ask you that, and or if you ask me that as a health worker, and I said, oh, I'm having a really hard time as a patient, then a mirroring would be having a similar facial expression, and you don't have to say everything's going to be fine. Don't worry. The person is worried. So the person can just say, I hear what you're saying.
mhm,
And that is hearing what you're saying. The expression is similar, emotional reflecting. Is that correct? You can
mhm,
the facial expression is similar, and the response isn't you'll be fine, don't worry.
mhm. Yeah,
Don't the response is not that's just how it is. You got to get through it. The
yeah,
response is it seems like you're number two here. It seems like you're feeling overwhelmed.
yeah,
I can understand that.
yeah. So in that example, a mirroring response might be, "Oh, you're having a really hard time," right? And then an emotional reflection would be, wow, you're really overwhelmed, right? We're assigning the label, we're giving it that emotion, and then you can come back and say, no, I'm not overwhelmed. I'm just really tired, and I'm kind of frustrated by my kid, right? So you say, no, you got it wrong, but it gives an opportunity to correct it and to continue the conversation. Or you say, yeah, I'm really overwhelmed. Thank you for saying that, right? Yeah.
And like Elise said, you might not get it right, but it takes time for us to stop and reflect because we are on automatic mode, socialized from how we were raised, from how we went to school, from our other influences. And so being able to say, okay, I'm going to speak to my patient in a way that is therapeutic communication rather than the communication I use at home, the communication I use with my friends, and making that extra effort to emotionally connect with that reflecting exercise.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. I see an interesting question here in the chat that I think gets at the intersection of both of these also. So sometimes I find myself emotional or crying while counseling a client who is expressing a sad and touching experience. The moment I see the client's tears, mine flow automatically. Is that normal? Um, there's a lot of schools of thought for how we show up with other people. That is very normal. You are seeing something that is sad, and you are sitting with that person. You are sitting in that space with them. You are showing empathy. It's not sympathy. It's not pitying somebody else. You are saying, I see you and I'm sitting with you. Right? There, we will talk a bit more later about some of the cultural differences and what it means to cry, and different aspects of our identity. And if you are male or female, or if you are crying with a peer or an elder, and just how that shifts our dynamic. And so there's this cultural lens as well that we can think about that. But I will say, to hear something sad and touching, it is a very normal experience to cry. The thing I will caution you on is, making sure that we are still centering the person that we are working with, right? So if we are becoming so emotional that they feel like they need to comfort us, then we need to take a moment for ourselves, recenter, ground ourselves, so that we feel like we can also show up for the other person. But that is a very human, normal response. Thank you for that question. And
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you, Elise. Just wanted to say that there's no questions in French.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, this connects also very closely to this idea of not knowing what the other person, like what we're reflecting back, is based on what we're hearing. We will need to make some inferences about what that underlying emotion is. And so it's hard to label the emotion, but do your best, and the conversation will go deeper as a result. And then, as Govinda shared earlier, try to resist the urge to jump to reassurances, right? Saying it'll get easier, don't worry. That might not be true of their experience. It might close them off when you want to be opening up the conversation. So rather, shedding tears with them, crying with them, sitting in that emotion, right? Labeling that emotion, demonstrating that empathy, that might be more reassuring to them than saying, yeah, it'll be fine, right? Often those reassurances are more about us and our own comfort with what is shared, rather than for the person we are actually speaking with. Okay, so those are the two kind of tools that I want to talk about, or two skills that I want to talk about with reflecting. Before moving on to clarifying, are there any questions? I think we've been answering as we go, but feel free.
We have our first question in French. Sister Florence from Madagascar. She's asking, how can we improve during those conversations? Like on the spot, what are some strategies that we could use in order to improve that active listening?
Yeah, great question. I think knowing these skills, giving them a label, right? Having at the forefront of your mind what it means to mirror, what it means to emotionally reflect. So knowing what the skills are, and then it's about practice. But I will say, in the moment, trying to give pause, trying to give space. Oftentimes we feel that, and this is cultural, but oftentimes we feel that we need to fill the silence. But that's not always true. We can pause and think about how we want to respond. And giving that pause and then trying to think back to what am I hearing? What am I picking up on? We'll have a practice next week also of this body scan. There will be more kind of tools next week that we'll talk about as well. But pause, observe what's going on in your own body, what you're seeing, and then hopefully giving name and labeling some of these things is helpful for you in your future conversations. But really, it is about practicing, truly.
And additionally, I want to add something. One piece of changing our behavior, one factor that determines if we change our behavior or not is having a plan, thinking about it, and then implementing that plan. So it can be something very little, and we can do it after the next two sections. So right now we're still on reflecting. After clarifying and inquiry, I don't think we'll get through all the slides today, but if you could do reflecting, clarifying, and inquiry instead of the closed-ended questions, you can just discuss perhaps an if-then plan, like when this happens, then I can, about one behavior change might be beneficial.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so if there are any questions, feel free to bring them, but if not, I will move forward. If there are questions that come in that we don't get to, we'll certainly follow up after as well. So the next bucket of tools, paraphrasing and summarizing. So this falls into this category of clarifying, trying to better understand what is being said. So paraphrasing they're similar, but paraphrasing is restating a single thought or statement in your own words to show that you are following. So unlike mirroring, it's not repeating what someone said, but taking what you heard and giving it back in a slightly different form. So it's close enough to be accurate, but in your own language. So it's signaling that you are present, you are tracking what the other person says. And it gives them that chance to confirm or correct that you understood. Whereas summarizing is pulling together several things that somebody said over a longer exchange, over the longer part of the conversation. And a summary is going to demonstrate that you are really understanding that bigger picture. And it can be helpful when you're at a transition point in the conversation. So maybe after reviewing a treatment plan or before moving to advice or questions or next steps. So the example here, a community member has been talking about the challenges of caring for an elderly parent while managing their own health. So a summary might sound like, it sounds like you're pulled in two directions, trying to be there for your mother while also making sure you don't neglect your own health. So in this one sentence, you're showing her that you are tracking the full picture and not just one detail, but everything that she's carrying. So a few things to then keep in mind, and similar to what we were just discussing, but be aware of your own assumptions and your interpretation of what you're reflecting back. You will need to interpret and paraphrase. That is part of this skill, but stay close to what was actually said and then check in after. Follow it with an invitation to say, did I get that right? And it gives the person permission to then say yes or no. And then we'll talk about checking for understanding before I'll pause for questions on this section of clarifying. So checking for understanding is about pausing to verify that you understand what that person, not just what they said, but what they meant. So our example, a community member explains she has been missing her appointments. She has no one to watch her children. So if you were to check for understanding, you might say, so childcare is the main thing making it difficult to come. Is that right? So then notice that the response stays pretty close to what she is actually saying, and it doesn't jump to solutions. We're not introducing anything new here. So then two things to keep in mind here. Frame it as your own uncertainty, not theirs. I want to make sure I'm following you, right? Lands very differently than, did you say this? It puts the responsibility for understanding on you, not on them. And then as always, watch for assumptions. We're checking for their meaning, not yours. Right? So if you respond saying, oh, so you need morning appointments so your husband can watch the children. You're assuming they have a husband and or that he is available to watch the kids, right? It's jumping to a solution rather than just checking for understanding. And then as we talked about previously, saying, don't worry, we'll figure something out. It skips the check entirely and moves to assurances and problem solving. So pause, check for understanding, and that will create that space for others to deepen the conversation and share details that might otherwise go unsaid. So in the spirit of checking for understanding, I will pause here as well and look for any questions. Okay.
I think the checking for understanding and the paraphrasing and summarizing is something that we're more familiar with in general. But use these skills that you are already familiar with to your advantage. So you already know these might be more common and you might already know how to do them. Now use them to your advantage to make sure you're understanding what the patient is really saying, avoiding communication errors in the actual process.
So then the third category is related to inquiry. So this is, we'll look at the difference between open and closed questions if we have some time, but really thinking about how do we ask open questions? So open questions are going to invite the person to share, explain, and describe their experience. They cannot be answered with a simple yes or no. But it's giving them space to tell us what matters in their own words. So our example, a community member has been struggling to follow her treatment plan. Instead, are you taking your medication? Which will be answered with yes, no, and really doesn't tell you anything about her personal experience or her view. But instead, maybe how has it been going with your medication? So slight but it opens up the entire conversation. And so then once again, watch for the way that we are is going to lead somebody towards a particular answer potentially without realizing it. So, and then also be careful with those why questions. Why aren't you coming to the clinic? It can feel sometimes like an interrogation or maybe accusatory. So instead, a reframe might be, what has made it difficult to come? Right? Ask the same thing, but in a way that feels a little safer. So to quickly make sure that or to see the difference between open and closed and see when and how you might use both, because I could spend a lot of time talking about the importance of open-ended questions, But sometimes close-ended questions are also important and they serve a purpose. So if you need short, specific answers, often yes or no, use a close-ended question. If you need to confirm a fact quickly or get a straightforward answer because it informs your next steps. So the example, did you take your medication this morning? That's a legitimate question at the right moment. The problem is when closed-ended questions become the default. When every question that you ask is yes or no, the conversation might feel like an interrogation, or you just really can't get deeper in the conversation. Whereas open questions are descriptive, they'll get detailed answers, and they'll give you a more full picture and not just those data points. And then it signals to the person that you are interested in their experience and not just collecting the information. So it's a way of sharing that power and inviting others into telling their own story and choosing the details that they want to share. And so the trick here is then knowing when to use which. And as it relates to community engagement and advocacy, I'd recommend start with open. Keep using open questions as long as you can, and then move over to closed questions if you need to confirm specific details, but really not to drive the whole conversation. Um, Sorry, checking for questions in the chat. So rephrasing is the person we're talking to meeting with us. Uh, what should we do? Can we clarify that or ask that?
Yes, I'll write to the sister right now and get that for you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I want to be mindful of time. What would be most helpful in our final couple of minutes together?
I would, I think this has been very good and a lot of information. As always, we're going to send out all of the documents. The next section is cultural factors in communication, but I want to go back to the initial slide that introduces these four, and actually one before this. And these are the common barriers. So I want everyone to think about a barrier that they have, whether that is distraction, rushing, hierarchy, emotional reaction, whatever it is, and say, when think to themselves or write it down on a paper and say that to themselves, when I'm feeling time pressure, then I will do this. That kind of plan will allow you to start implementing these behaviors. Sometimes it's called an if then plan, or there are several different ways. When then plan, when this happens, then I do this. If this happens, then I do that. But putting an action plan into effect will help you. If I feel an emotional reaction, then I will ask for clarification or whatever it may be. You can inquire more, you can reflect more. And if there aren't questions in the chat, I think you can go on to the practice from closed to open.
Look forward to. So about how much more time. Oh, do you want me to, should we try and wrap it up in the next minute or two, or do we have a few? Oh, oh, wait.
Hi. Okay. Govinda had to leave. We have about 15 minutes. I think we can do the practice from close to open now and then leave the cultural awareness for the next session.
Awesome. Sounds great. Okay, so I'm glad we have a few extra minutes of your
Yeah.
time. So yeah, let's practice these because I think uh, closed and open-ended questions can be really powerful in your work with folks. So these are the kinds of questions that come up regularly in community health work. So let's practice rewriting each one as an open question. So there's no one answer or one right answer. There are many ways that you can open up a question, but let's see what we come up with, right? So let's start with, are you feeling better? How would you phrase this as an open question? Feel free to write in the chat or come on mic and share. Yeah. How are you feeling now? Absolutely. How have you been feeling since we last spoke? Awesome. Okay, the next one, is your child eating well? How would you open this? So, is your child eating well? How do you say this as an open question? So, how are your child's eating habits? Yeah. Or can you tell me about your child's eating habits? What has that been like? Mm. So this one's interesting because there are also assumptions around what it means to eat well, right? So what our version of eating well might be very different than the person we're talking to. So an open question might be more appropriate here. So yeah, what is the appetite of your child? How is your child's appetite? Yeah. So this other one in the chat, is your child taking his or her vegetables? That's a closed question that will get to a yes or no answer. It's maybe an important question because it further clarifies what it means to eat well, but it will still give you a yes or no answer. But yeah, so how has your child been eating lately might tell you not just about the vegetables, but about something else as well. So the third, do you understand the treatment plan? And this one might be, how would you open this up? It might also be, you might want to make sure that they understand, a good moment to check understanding. But you might also want it to be more of a conversation. So, yeah, how would you open this one up? Yeah, can you share with me your treatment plan? Mm-hmm. Can you please share with me your treatment plan? Mm-hmm. How do you feel about the treatment plan? Yeah. What questions do you have about the treatment plan? Yeah, absolutely. How's your treatment plan going? What's your understanding? Yeah, great. Awesome. You're rock stars in the chat. Okay, so the third one, are you taking your medication? How would you open this up? So how would you open, are you taking your medication? Mm, yeah, how do you take your medication? How do you feel at the treatment plan? What medications did you take yesterday? So this is a really good example because this is actually it is an open question, but it still is somewhat limiting. And so similar to, are you taking your medication, might be really important as a quick, allows you to get to the next thing. You might want to sometimes keep this as a closed question, but if you're wanting to better understand the schedule for taking medication, their side effects, how they feel about it, whether they want to be taking, right? Yeah, if you feel it's helping you, right? So we might phrase it differently depending on what we want to learn about the medication and their experience with it. Okay, so the next one, do you have support at home? How would you ask this as an open question? Where are you finding support and what does that look like for you? Yeah, who is helping you at home? Who are you staying with at home? How is your support? Awesome. Yeah, yeah, tell me more about your support. Who do you have around you? Yeah. So the question, we are flipping these questions from closed-ended questions to open-ended questions. So the most recent one is, do you have support at home? Yeah. And then the last one, and this is so often, we often end our sessions with, do you have any questions? And if you end the session this way, and sometimes you do need to end the session, maybe you've gone really deep and have had a really good conversation, and it is a way to tie this up. And so sometimes you do want this as a closed-ended question, but maybe you're in the middle of the session and maybe you want to open it up and explore more, or maybe you didn't get as deep as you would have hoped. So how about you rephrase and open up this last question of, do you have any questions? How do you say, do you have any questions as an open-ended question? Yeah, what would you like me to clarify? Yeah, what questions do you have for me today? Yeah, is there anything more you'd like me to talk about or like us to talk about? Awesome. These are excellent. These are really wonderful. And I think you've also done a great job of showing that there's not one right answer. Depending on the direction that you take the conversation, depending on what you want to know about the other person, you will use a different question depending. So yeah, really great examples. So yeah, as you leave here today, try this with your friends and family. Ask a closed-ended question and see the response you get. And then follow it up with an open question and see where the conversation goes from there. It's a really simple but really powerful way to deepen the conversation. Um, okay, and so we will pause here. We'll pause from the cultural awareness that you will have access to the slides. But before your next session, try using some of the communication techniques that we discussed today. Notice what happens, what opened up, what felt different. Come ready to share. Our next session will be on July 28th, so we have a bit of a break. It'll focus on navigating difficult conversations, and we will take everything that we just practiced and put it to the test in situations that feel more complex and emotional and charged, so where all the stakes are higher. So I'll pause here and hand it back to Esther, and thank you all for your engagement today, and we will follow up with there are any questions that we missed.
Thank you. Thank you, Elise, so much for this wonderful session. We knew it was possible that we were not going to be able to complete everything that we set out to discuss today because of how engaging the topic is. So thank you so much. I am going to share my screen for a minute just because I want to just do a little promotion here. If you're interested in the topics that we just shared, I invite you to take our leadership course in the next cohort. which deals with communication and difficult conversations. And also, I'm gonna keep scrolling just to show you, but also our maternal and child health communication learning path. It's only 5 weeks, and it deals a lot with active listening, communication skills, and how to um, do open questions and closed questions, and when is the best time to do so. So I just wanted to kind of promote a little bit that for our October cohort, you can do the maternal and child health communication or the leadership learning path, which is 8 weeks. Um, and I'm sorry, I lost. Okay, here we go. Again, thank you, Elise, and thank you everyone for being here today and for your participation. I am going to take some of the unanswered questions and send them to Elise so that we can maybe draft a little text response to you and share it with you when we share the recording for this presentation. We will not have a um a webinar next week. We will see each other in 2 week in actually 3 weeks on July 28th, when we will discuss navigating difficult conversations about conflict resolution. So be on the lookout for our reminder emails, and we hope to see you in over 3 weeks. Thank you so much for being here. For everyone who wants to maybe put on their cameras and take a picture of our amazing audience today, we would really appreciate it. So yeah, I'm gonna give it about 10 seconds so that everyone comes up and we will take those pictures. Let me set up my computer so that I can take a good screenshot. Thank you for your patience. Okay, so we're gonna do two. So 1, 2, and 3 coming up. And then another one. I love it when there's so many people that turn on their cameras. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you again for being here and for actively participating in our conversations. Thank you so much, and expect the recording by later on today. Thank you. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you so much for your energy.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye. God
Bye-bye.
bless. Bye.
Bye.
Thank
Ciao.
you.